Hey everyone, welcome back to Stone and Straw. This is episode 9, season 2, episode 3, for those of you who prefer it in that format. I am your host, John Cullen, and we got a great episode for you this week. I am fresh off of BC Provincials. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Before we get to that, got to thank our sponsors, CurlingZone, Dynasty Curling, and Hardline Curling. Been bringing you this podcast for 9 episodes strong. This is the first half of season 2 is going to be over at the end of this episode. We've got 3 more to go in this season, and then we'll be off for the summer, and then back again next year, hopefully with more guests and more of the stuff that you love. I'm extremely exhausted. I was just away at BC Provincials for a full week. This year, they combined the BC men's and women's provincials into one tournament out in Quesnel, British Columbia. They did that because they were able to secure an arena. So this is my 10th time at BC Provincials. The first time it was not in a curling club. So that was super exciting, really nice to play on arena ice. And the boys did okay. We ended up coming in 3rd place. We had a bit of a long grind. We started the tournament very slow. And that is definitely one of the things I tweet a lot about, what it is to be a tier 2, or I guess this year for us, we were kind of a tier 3 team. And some of the challenges that you face when you're not able to commit as hard as other teams, or when you're not able to play as much or have as much sponsorship money or whatever the case may be. And that's kind of the difficulty for us. And we really found that out this year. It's tough because we got the bye to provincials, which is really nice. We had some really good results to start the year. We were able to secure one of the BC Tour spots at provincials, but then we don't play for 2 months because our playdowns are in December and January. We were looking at going to Arizona, as we have done in the past few years, to get those kind of reps in before provincials. Unfortunately, Arizona had to push a week later this year because of the Grand Slam. And in doing so, that ran the Arizona weekend right up against provincials. So we would have had to fly directly from Phoenix to Quesnel. Would have been an extremely long 11 days or so of curling. And so we decided not to do that. And boy, did we look like it in our first couple games. We started out 1-2, dropped all the way to the beautiful C side of the draw, where we went on a nice little run to the semifinal, where we unfortunately kind of laid an egg and got our business handed to us by Team Montgomery. Team Cotter, though, the class of the field all week. They look great with Steve Laycock at 3rd. I think that's Jim's 8th or 9th provincial win. So one of these days, one of these years, I tweeted that the title of my autobiography will be "There's Always Next Year." And that's pretty much how it's been so far. So we'll see what the cards have in store for me for next season, but that was kind of the story of provincials. Have to shout out the city of Quesnel. What an unbelievable show. That's one of the beautiful parts when the provincial championships go to a smaller town. They really embrace it, and they totally did in Quesnel this week. We were treated absolutely first class. The event had over 170 volunteers. They needed officials for provincials, and when I was told by a Curl BC official that generally when they go into these small towns and they need officials, they tend to have, maybe 10, 15 people sign up for the level 1 officiating course. Quesnel had 60 people sign up. They did 2 officiating clinics and had 30 people at each one. So pretty insane. We had an amazing time. It was a great show. So thanks again to the city of Quesnel. And thank you to Hardline and Dynasty for sponsoring my team and helping us achieve our goals this season. I mean, we didn't achieve the ultimate goal, but we had a nice year all the same. Shout out to my teammates, Josh Barry, Sebastian Robillard, and Jay Wakefield. It was a really fun year. Okay, let's get to this week's episode. This man also had a bit of a disappointment at provincials, but one of the best leads of all time, one of the best curlers of all time, on one of the best teams of all time, on one of the best junior teams of all time, too. It's Craig Savill this week, and boy, is this episode ever a really good one. He really opened up to me. I didn't know Craig too well before doing this podcast, and so you never know exactly how it's going to go, but we got into just about everything, how Team Glenn Howard operated. We got into Craig's cancer diagnosis, all that stuff. It was it was really a pretty special episode and something that I was really proud to be a part of. And I really thank Craig for his openness and his honesty. And I know you guys are really going to love this one. So I know this has been a little bit of a longer intro, but I wanted to talk about provincials, and I wanted to make sure that I recorded this intro once all the provincials were over, so we could, make sure that I wasn't doing some intro where I was like, hey, I'm leaving for provincials, and then this episode gets posted and provincials are over and who cares. So anyway, without further ado, this is yesterday's Ontario second place finisher, multiple time Brier World Champion, World Junior Champion. It's Craig Savill. This episode of Stone and Straw is brought to you in part by Dynasty Curling. Dynasty Curling is a Canadian company that has been around since 2015, changing the landscape of curling apparel both on and off the ice. And my team uses Dynasty. We're repping the Dynasty clothes out there. They're super comfortable, super nice, and we're not the only ones who use them. Obviously, Olympic and world champions, Team Jennifer Jones, Team Chelsea Carey, Team Gushu, Team Adine, Team Kody, and many more. If you follow them on Twitter at Dynasty Curling, you can see their insanely good roster. But what a lot of people probably don't know is that Dynasty also creates a lot of curling products for off the ice as well. It could be hats and hoodies that just have the Dynasty logo on it, which look great. They have gear to support your favorite team or your favorite province at the Brier or the Scotties. And they also have workout gear, which is really cool too. So you should obviously check them out, and especially check out that apparel. You probably didn't know. You probably just think, oh, it's only this sublimated curling gear I see on the ice. No, they have awesome off-ice stuff, and because they're really sweet, they have a deal just for you for listening to this podcast. If you use the promo code STONESTRAW at checkout, you'll get 10% off your any purchase you make of Dynasty off-ice apparel. So that's pretty amazing. So head on over to dynastycurling.com, enter in the promo code STONESTRAW, and you'll get 10% off your order of Dynasty off-ice apparel. And if you live in Winnipeg, they just opened a retail store, so you can check that out at the Granite Club in Winnipeg, or check them out online at Dynasty Curling on Twitter, Instagram, or dynastycurling.com. Dive right in. Okay, so I start all of these pods with a very basic question. How did you get started in curling?
My parents got me into it. My dad was a junior coordinator at the local curling club, and I resisted early on, played with my Legos in the corner of the room. Stubborn kid, didn't want to play. And then Christmas time, they had a family bonspiel, and they needed me to play. And once I tried, I got hooked right away.
You can't say no at Christmas.
No,
exactly. That's the family thing.
I'm just looking for presents at Christmas time, right? So yeah.
More Lego.
Yeah, that's right.
If I curl, I'll get more Lego.
And they promised they'd tell Santa if I didn't curl. So I said, I better be on Santa's good books around Christmas time. So
that's good. So you said you loved it like right away. How old were you at the time?
I was 10. Yeah, and it helped. I mean, my really good friend at the time too, he started it as well. And I think almost like every other sport, you can get into it with your friends. And so I started playing with him. And my brother, who's 5 years older, was playing too, so it was easy to get going. Yeah,
that's great. See, I don't have that family background, so it's always like no one really pushed me into it. So I feel like it must be not hard, but hard to resist if your parents are always like, we're at the club, we're doing the thing. Like,
well, yeah. So I remember it was every Sunday we would play. Sunday mornings was our time, and I just did it once a week to start for the first few years. And my mom was always going to watch my brother, and she said, well, you don't have to curl, but we're going to the curling club, and you can sit in the corner if you want. So that's what I mean. I resisted for a little while, and then eventually I'm like, well, I may as well go on the ice if I'm here anyways.
And then when did you kind of start to crank it up? So you said you loved it right away, but then when did it start to be like, I might actually be pretty good at this?
Yeah, well, you know what? I actually was never thinking I was really good at it. It was interesting because the way it was set up, the older kids were always on sheet one, and they had different drills, and they always got to play a game at the end. And then us little rockers, I was still throwing with a small rock and just trying to get it halfway down the sheet. And my goal in curling was literally just to play on sheet one with the older kids and be able to play in a game. That was it. Little goals, right?
Yeah,
so I remember that my second year playing, they needed a player, and I got the call up to the big leagues, right?
Baby.
And I went over there, and my huge smile on my face, and I was just beaming getting to play in this. So, but that wasn't when I realized that I maybe had some talent and tried to play. But it was 3 years later, and when I was 13, John Morris came into the curling club and he was looking for a player. One of his guys was moving away. So he had a little mini tryout, which ironically, it was my good friend who got me into curling. It was him and I kind of against each other, not knowing. But it was more, hey, let's go play in this league, see if we get along. And I got along with the guys really well, and they asked me to play. And that's when I actually started touring and playing in sort of bonspiels and stuff.
Was that kind of weird that you're trying out for a team of a guy that's very similar in age to you? Like, was he already that good where you were like, okay, this is the...
I remember him coming into the curling club and sort of knowing about this guy who's a pretty decent player and playing in tournaments. You just hear about guys, right? It's not when he was playing in tournaments. He played in like one other like little league tournament.
Yeah, sure,
right? It wasn't he was
yeah.
traveling or anything.
He was in the slams at 13.
Yeah. So he had maybe played another bonspiel at another club in Ottawa, right? So... but yeah, it was really weird. I didn't feel like it was a tryout. He was just like, hey, do you want to just see if this kind of works out? And I played. And then right after the game, they said, hey, do you want to play with us next year? It was one of those things. And I wasn't even thinking like, oh, I want to curl more and I want to start touring around. And when I say tour, I mean, drive 20 minutes to the next curling club. Of course, yeah. So I was never even thinking about that. I just thought, this might be good to get on a curling team. And there you go from there.
Nice. So let's go right into John Morris, because you guys had obviously a great junior career. I mean, you won back-to-back World Juniors and you guys had a really great thing going. And I asked him the same question when he was on the podcast. Was it difficult with all those expectations to make that transition into men's curling? Because I know that you guys curled against men earlier, like when you were still juniors, but was there a thing like, okay, we've won back-to-back Worlds that you expected to be so good when you got into men's? Or
that transition going from juniors to men's is a big leap. In juniors we had a bit of a style of wait until the other team misses, and we actually played a really open style, and we just hit, and the other team would flash, and we draw for two. Right. I mean, that was kind of our style. Juniors has changed a little bit now. I think they're better now.
Yeah.
But that was our style. And you go into men's, you don't get those misses really anymore. And you had to create deuces now. And, that was completely different for us. So, yeah, we had some experience in men's because we were doing the half and half by the last few years of juniors, which you need to do to get better. You got to play some men's teams and get your ass kicked a little bit, right? And then, so when we got in there, I mean, John has such high expectations. And it feeds off on the rest of us, and him coming out and going into men's saying, okay, well, yeah, we're going to win some spiels and go to the Brier. We're like, well, we're kind of playing against the legends of the game that I grew up when I was in diapers watching play with no chance for us. But that sort of feeds off to the rest of the team. And yeah, we had expectations for sure.
And so was there like a time where that was difficult? Like maybe you weren't living up to those expectations? Like what were there conversations about that? Was that part of the sort of growing as a team? Or
yeah, no, absolutely. I think we got our butts handed to us a number of times, and you try to learn from that. And I still remember us getting into the Olympic trials in 2001, and that was one of our goals, right? Let's try to get there and see what happens. And they had a whole bunch of these big tournaments. They had 64 men's teams playing, and you'd get one spot that would get into the trials. Right. Huge tournaments, right, around the country. So we played in a couple of those, just getting killed and trying to qualify. That was basically our goals in these men's tournaments. And so we bombed out in a few of them. We go to the Welton, which is in Ottawa, which is one of the greatest spiels out there, and we go bang, bang, bang. And we have the last chance to get into the Olympic trials is one out in Halifax, another 64 team. And then after that, we've got junior spiels left, and we're playing mostly men's, provincials at that time. So we said, you know what? Earl sat us down and said, you know what, guys? You guys are fighting. You're not playing very good. Why don't you just take the week off and focus for provincials down the road? And, knowing us not listening to, Earl and our parents and stuff, and especially John, as soon as someone says don't, then yeah, we're going to do it. And you know what? We said, no, forget it. We're going out to Halifax. Anyways, we go into Halifax, and of course we beat Vic Peters in the final and get us into the Olympic trials. And it's just, that's a funny situation where, Earl telling us not to, and then us getting it to as a group together and realizing, wait a minute, we got to play as a team here and show Earl, our coach, that he's wrong.
So maybe a little bit of reverse psychology from Earl to Pearl there.
You know what? Yeah. You know what? To this day, he says he wasn't doing that, but knowing Earl, he probably was.
Yeah. So so you play in a spiel in your hometown, you go bang, bang, bang. Did you So you said like it was the goal to make the trials, but you guys were still young. Like if you hadn't made the trials, do you think that would have like, would that have been a massive disappointment, or just kind of like, well, we're still young, whatever. You lose to Vic Peters, say, in Halifax. Okay, well, that's Vic Peters, right?
Yeah, sure. I don't think that would have really changed much at all. I think it would have been a disappointment that we didn't reach our goal. And, you go to provincials and you try to get to the Brier and stuff. So I don't think that would have changed much. Maybe set off some alarm bells that, hey, we're not playing very good. Maybe we have to change something up. Maybe that would have happened.
So then you did make the Brier, and you're very young at the Brier. What was that experience like? Because I know that you guys had an amazing run, but then like, how does that affect you going forward? Like, I'm just going to end the question there.
Yeah. Well,
so I don't know where I'm going.
So when I look back and, people ask me, what were your goals and stuff in curling? And my goals were so small and it was just incremental. Yeah. Well, it literally went back to sheet one, and then I was in juniors. Never even thought about the Brier. I watched the Brier all the time, and I learned time zones because of the Brier, because I knew if it was out in BC, I knew it would be earlier in Ottawa, and so I just knew when the Brier was, and I watched it all the time. And the Scotties the same thing too, right? I couldn't get enough of it. So my goal was I just wanted to play in a Brier someday. And I didn't think it was going to happen just out of juniors. I thought it was going to happen, years later, maybe, struggle through and get there somehow. So when we went to the Brier in 2002, I remember talking to John, and, we said, listen, this could be a once in a lifetime chance. It's so hard to get to the Brier. Let's make the most of it. And we probably did what you're not supposed to do. And we just partied all the time. And we said, let's forget it. This could be it. And so let's make the most of it. So, we were in the patch almost every night, and we lived it up, and we certainly enjoyed ourselves, and we're probably pretty tired and hungover a few mornings when we were playing. And but I think that helped us because we were loose, and we played really well at that Brier and ended up getting to the finals. But what an experience, and knowing afterwards, coming back from them, I said, we lost the final, but what an experience we had, and wouldn't change that for the world, and wouldn't have done anything different, because you just never know. Was
there a point in the week where you flipped a switch, where you're like, oh boy, we're actually making a pretty good run here? I know we've been drinking every night and we're hungover for some of these games. Like, was there a point where you flipped it and you're like, well, we could win this?
Yeah, we settled down a little bit near the end of the week, where we'd get home at 1:00 maybe instead. But, we certainly, when we started getting to the playoff contention, absolutely. But yeah, it was interesting, because I have so many vivid memories of, playing Russ Howard in the semifinal there, and then, playing in Calgary, and having the wave go around, with 15,000 people. The place was sold out, and playing Furby, and everybody, we'd gained some fans because we're this young team that was brash, and they saw us out in the patch, and I think they loved that. But overwhelmingly, everybody was cheering for Furby. And I just remember this wave going around. I still get chills to this day of hearing this wave go around me, and what an incredible experience. It's nothing being in the stands when you get that. People get that at hockey games all the time, but being right in the middle of it on the ice, watching this thing go around is pretty crazy, and something I always remember.
And so, because I remember John's, because you guys were behind early, and I remember John's fifth end interview, and he was almost like it almost seemed like he was like, oh boy, like almost out of energy in a way, like just like, oh, we're here and this is happening. Like, was that did you have a similar feeling to that as well, where you get to the Brier final, you're like, okay, awesome, and then you realize like, oh, we're playing the best team in the world in their home province, and we've run out of energy?
No, I don't. You know what? It wasn't sort of the energy. It was the fifth end when we were playing. It was a tied game and playing really well against these guys, and then we got in a situation, tons of rocks, and they were about to, I think they're about to draw for 2, and instead Marcel says, well, why don't we just hit this one on the nose, make this double, and we can get 4, and they end up making it, and it was just so deflating, because 4 back then is just lights out too, right, with the rules. So that was deflating. And it was disappointing. John's sitting in the back and slumped down in his chair, and he's an emotional man. So I think his fifth end, I think he probably said he was going to quit curling again, which was about 10th time he said he was going to quit curling. But yeah, that was sort of deflating because it just sort of took all the wind out of our sails, and you try to battle back, but it's hard to against that team.
Especially like you said, was that still 3 Rock back then?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's trouble.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so talk to me about John, because you guys played together for a very long time. How did that breakup kind of come about? Was it just a fact that he was moving, or was there more to it? What did that look like?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of a couple things. I know every time we went out west, he'd say, "Oh man, I just love it out here," and he'd gain some friends out there, and he'd say, "Why do we live in Ontario? I just love." Although, hey, let's not knock Ontario, because he loves Ontario, but he just loved everything about the West Coast, and I think it probably made sense for him because I think he wanted a change of teams. So this made it easier when, I've got to move provinces, so I can't play with you guys anymore. And he loved being out west. So I think that's where he saw his curling career. He wanted to be in Alberta. I think he needed to be around the best to be the best as well.
And so what were you thinking when that happened? Like, were you devastated? Like, what was
I thought it was coming. I was pretty upset when we lost out in the provincials the following year, and I think I was probably more upset because I knew our team was going to be done.
Right.
That was probably more upsetting than actually losing out in the provincials, not getting back to the Brier. So I kind of saw it was coming, and then when it happens, I just said, what's going to happen to my curling career now? Like, who am I going to play with? And it's you just don't know, because you start playing with a guy for so long, and then you're, one of the best teams, and then you go from that, and what are the options out there, right? So yeah, that was a scary part.
For sure. So I was going to talk about that, because John kind of went to Alberta, and he sort of, ended up having a pretty decent team out there. And when I interviewed him, he talked about how he just, when I was talking specifically about the Kevin Martin team coming together, he said that he kind of had a moment where he was like, I had always kind of been around the top 10 or the top 20, but I was never taking that step to be like the top guy in the world. Was that something that you thought about as well? Did you have that kind of moment where you're sort of spinning around? Because you skipped for a year, I think, right?
Yeah, not very well, but yeah.
So were you kind of spinning around thinking like, oh, what's going to happen now? And did you have that moment of like, I got to do something to get on a team where I can get back to that level?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So after that year, I played a little bit with Heath McCormick and Brent, and then I kind of skipped a team as well, and that was just sort of to stay in the game and see if I liked sort of skipping and playing back end. And the skipping, the team I had, just it didn't work out personality wise and skill wise as well, and everything. I realized that I'm not a skip as well, except for Wednesday nights at the Ottawa Curling Club. I still kill it there. But
shout out to the Ottawa Curling Club. You know who you are. I kick your ass.
That's right.
Yeah,
they know. So, but yeah, that was a year that it was kind of a transition year, and saying, okay, I'm going to just see what's out there. And then, I really wanted to get back in the game and get back to the top level. Absolutely.
And so how did the Glenn Howard team come together? I always love hearing about team formation. So you're skipping, you had a kind of, like you said, a year where you sort of didn't really know what was going on, just trying to stay in the game. How does that team come together?
So, probably just like a lot of teams, there's a lot of back office stuff that goes on behind the scenes and talk behind people's backs. And Brent and I had cornered Rich and Glenn a few times, and told them they've got to cut the Mitchell boys and take us on instead. And we pressured them. They said, no. And, Glenn likes to keep his teams around, and is pretty loyal. So they were, I don't know if they're hemming and hawing or what they were doing. And eventually one of the Collins boys said they couldn't play, or both of them said they couldn't play as much anymore. So it was an easy excuse. I don't know if they actually cut him, but that's the line they used with the media and everybody else. So, anyways, they called Brent up and asked if they wanted to play. And Brent called me. And he said, yeah, the Glenn Howard just asked us to play. And I still remember saying, hey, play it cool. don't call him back right away. Make him think we have some options, and let him sweat it out for at least 2 or 3 minutes.
Give that old 3-day waiting period or whatever. I got the girl's number, but I don't want her to think I'm too interested.
But it was one of those don't call him right away. But wait a minute, what happens if they talk to anybody else? We better call him right now.
Well, because like you said, there's so much back office stuff going on. You're like, we got to get in there.
Yeah. And you know what? The bad part was that we'd had a team meeting with Heath McCormick, and a great buddy of mine, and an amazing person. And we had sort of formed a team and sort of got things together playing with them. And we had a phone and say, listen, we got this opportunity, and, good on Heath, and just said, hey, you know what? That's a good opportunity you can't say no to. And he's still the guy that if we win a tournament, he's the first one to text or email us and say congratulations. So
that's great.
It was easy, yeah. But yeah, real easy decision to say yes to Glenn.
No kidding. So as part of that decision, you moved down to lead, which was a position that you hadn't played before, I don't think, or not too much up to that point.
Yeah, I'd played it a little bit with John. Yeah.
Right. But so what was that adjustment period like? Was there ever, because I know that at times you, like Brent played lead and you played second. And so how did that conversation look like as far as, okay, Brent's going to be the second, I'm going to be the lead. What did that look like?
So, it was always going to be me playing lead and Brent second. We had switched, in men's, we had switched it around. So that was it was a no-brainer what positions it was going to be. The transition was, playing with Glenn and Rich, but the transition was really easy because they're really easy guys to play with, and they're really good. So that made it easy.
So you're like, no problem. This is good stuff. So like you said, that kind of came together. You had a great opportunity to play with Glenn. When did you start to feel? Was there like a moment where you started to feel like we have a special unit here?
Oh yeah, actually, yeah, clear as day. So we played Shorty, our first one. We bomb out, don't qualify, but had a great time. Off the ice, we got to know each other because you know somebody on tour, but then once you start playing with them and staying in the same room, then you start really knowing their personalities and stuff. And it's an easier fit when you have 2 and 2 coming together. Brent and I know each other so well, coming from juniors, and then Rich and Glenn had been playing years together. So it was not like we're bringing 4 separate guys. It was kind of like 2 guys coming together. And their personalities are the same. They like to do the same things as us. So that made it really easy. And so we bombed out in Shorty, but then we went out to Regina and played a spiel there. And I still remember, and Glenn started getting really hot in the middle of the week. And then Rich came up to us and said, "Oh, hold on, boys, skipper's hot. This gets fun to watch." And I remember that was the term, and I started getting sick of saying "great shot, Glenn," because I just said it every time he threw, and I eventually had to. His great shots were, "Oh, good one." It was like, that's okay, I guess.
You had to dial it back a little bit. You're like, I got to save great shot for like a monumental.
Great shot's now a little bit different in his vocabulary, right? So I knew something was special there, and that we had something really good as a team. Not knowing what we were going to do in the future, but just knowing we had a solid team.
So like you said, it comes together as a 2 and 2, and I do feel like a lot of times with curling teams, that is sort of how it happens, or it's like a 3 and 1 or that kind of situation. It's pretty rare these days that it's like a totally brand new unit of 4 people. So how do you bridge that gap? I mean, because you and Brent are also younger. So were there certain specific things that you guys thought about and did to kind of come together, or was it natural?
I think it was pretty natural. Having roles on the team probably helped, and we always called Rich Uncle Rich and Glenn Dad. It's pretty funny. I don't know if that was behind his back, so maybe I shouldn't have said that out loud. Shoot, maybe that was it. But like having some roles. I mean, our personalities got along really well, and when Brent and I first started with the team, we were pretty quiet and let them do their own thing, and learned pretty quick that Rich was pretty much in charge of things, and Glenn was, put the broom down and tell me the weight and I'll throw it exactly like that. And so it was pretty easy. So, we just sort of stepped back, played well, and let them do their thing. And that's probably what they needed at that time.
So as it starts to evolve, you guys develop this rivalry with Kevin Martin. I would say probably the biggest rivalry that's ever existed between two teams, not necessarily in an animosity way, but just in terms of you guys are always playing big games against each other. How did it feel to be involved in something like that where probably some or a lot of your focus was on beating one team?
Yeah, well, it would have been nice if we beat them more often. Then that rivalry would have been a lot more fun. I mean, those guys cost me an Olympic gold medal and probably hundreds of thousands of dollars as well. But yeah, no, it's pretty neat. You know, every time you're going to play that team, it's going to be a great game. And, our coach actually mentioned, probably halfway through, playing with these guys that they noticed that when Kevin Martin's on another sheet, we have a lot of focus on their game and we watch their game. But when he's not on the ice and we're playing, we have more focus on our own game. And that's just because we knew they were the other team. And, for years, let's be honest, like we joke about this, that, we kind of just slugged around in the round robin and stuff. And we knew, didn't really have to try until the playoffs. And you get into the playoffs and you just, hope Kevin Martin's on the other side of the draw. And they're hoping we're on the other side of the draw so we can meet in the final. And, it's if you meet in the semis, like, where one of us is going to lose in the semis now instead, and then the other guy's going to win the tournament. And that's what it was like, because I think our teams were so much further ahead than a lot of the other teams out there that it was just the two of us. And, we kind of start trying in the playoffs and, you get to squeak your way and we'll get in the final, probably play Kevin Martin. Hopefully he loses out someone else. And if he does, we're going to win the tournament. It was one of those, right? So there's tons of focus on them when they were playing. And you always knew it was going to be a good game and you had to play good.
Was there... did it seem, so you kind of touched on this a little bit, but did there come a point where the rivalry swallowed you up at all, or whether you thought oh God, when is it just going to end? Did you ever have a moment like that, or were you always just happy to go out and just try your best and play your best?
Yeah, against the Martin team? Yeah, no, it probably started getting a little old when they beat us in the trial final and the Brier final. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's might have started getting in our heads maybe a little bit. Right. But, could we have done something a little bit different to win a couple more of the games? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, absolutely. But it was fun just to be in a rivalry like that because we won our fair share of games too and stuff. And it was pretty neat just to be top two teams in the world at that time. Was
it weird that John was on the other side of the rivalry?
Just interesting where, the three guys from juniors are all 1-2 in the world. And that's pretty unique, I think, in our sport, where you've got three guys just out of juniors, a few years out of juniors, and they're 1 and 2 in the world. Pretty cool. And, I'll always be friends with John and pretty neat to watch him on tour. And he's a maniac to watch too, because he's such an emotional wreck, just with Ben as well. But that's what makes him great as well, right? He's the old heart on the sleeve. And when things are going well, it looks great. And when it's not, then you kind of watch and see what he does next.
Were you guys ever talking about it? Was there ever times where you two just kind of sat around and sort of compared your teams and talked about what was going on?
Ben and I joke around all the time about it and say how good it was back in the day when it was just the two teams and we'd meet each other in the final and that's it and clean up. So yeah, we joke about it now because now it's a grind out there. All these teams that were not very good before, they're all good now. And we don't want to admit that maybe we're not as good, but I think
don't worry, I won't tell anyone.
Yeah, no, I think all these teams are good now, and it's a grind. The slams, used to be, you'd have a whole bunch of teams that you just drill, and then you'd have a couple tough games, and literally you probably going to get to the semi each time, depending on how the draw worked out. But now you're just trying to qualify in these things. It's a lot harder. It's a lot more of a grind. And it was easier mentally and physically because, a lot of these games, it would be blowouts. Yeah. And literally you don't have to try as hard. Yeah. You're not sweeping as much. You don't play as many ends, and mentally you're not grinding it out. And now, you're playing all 8 ends every single time and you're grinding it out and you're having to concentrate. So yeah, my concentration level had to go way up.
Way up.
Yes.
Did you have I know when I talked to John and Mark about the Martin team, they talked a lot about their team as a business, and that was kind of what ended up swallowing their team. Your team seemed a little bit less like that. Is that a true thing to say?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the reasons why we were so successful is we just like to have a lot of fun on and off the ice, and we joked around a lot, and we have lots of inside stories and jokes with each other, and that's what we wanted to do. We just wanted to have fun, keep a smile on our face, especially when we're playing. We always notice if we're laughing and joking around, we're a lot better on the ice than when we're real dead serious. And I don't want to say into the game because we're into the game, but not keeping it light. And that's what we needed to do. And I mean, like, let's be honest, this game, the season's long. You spend tons of times with each other. You got to like each other. And I think that's what we did first. And it was successful for us.
When you look back, do you ever think, because like you said, Martin tended to come out on top in a lot of the bigger games that you guys had.
Sure.
Looking back, is there something that you think maybe we could have done that and that might have helped us?
Yeah, maybe sort of the latter part of Team Howard. As teams go, especially if you stick around for long enough, and our team was one of the longest running teams. You have these ebbs and flows, and you have to start doing some things differently. And we probably should have had a few more conversations, the four of us, and had someone come in and help us with a few things. Because there's a couple of things that were, sliding under the table that we didn't talk about, or three of us talked about when the other person wasn't in the room, which is why you never miss a breakfast with a team, by the way, because if you do, they're talking about you behind your back. So
good advice out there for the junior curlers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get up for breakfast.
Yes. So yeah, we probably could have done that a little bit better, and probably maybe being a little bit more successful. But we didn't talk a lot about those big games and why we weren't winning and why we didn't play maybe at our best in those big games for whatever reason it was. But I think because we won our fair share,
right,
it wasn't the biggest.
Well, because that's what I was going to say. Like, it must be hard because you like you said, you kind of know as one of the top two teams, and you guys were the clear top two. It must be hard to try and search for that like extra % that's going to help you beat one team.
Yeah, and we certainly did. I mean, we worked with sports psychologists too, and we had lots of talks, and we had Scott Taylor working with us as well. So it's not like we didn't, but looking back, is there a couple extra things we could have done? Maybe. That was just our team as well, though, that not being overcoached and not doing too much as well. And that sort of worked with us. So, maybe that's just the way it was going to go.
This episode is brought to you by Hardline Curling Supplies. And I'm happy that it is brought by Hardline Curling Supplies because I'm a Hardline Nation member. My team's been using Hardline for the last 5 years. We were onto Hardline products before they were even on Dragon's Den. Can you believe that? Ice Pad. It's the most technologically advanced brush on the market. You don't believe me? 7 of the top 9 men's teams and 10 of the top 15 women's teams in the world are all using this brush. Kevin Cooey, Brad Gushu, Nicholas Adine, Anna Hasselborg, Reed Carruthers, Chelsea Carey, Mike McEwen, the list goes on. And they're great for the rec curler too. Don't just think, I club curl, it's not good enough for me. It's phenomenal for you. It helps with your shoulders. You can use it for over 100 games. When your head wears out, you just throw it in the wash and you can use it again. It saves you money. It helps the environment. And they got a lot of great products too. They've got the best pants. Are you one of those cold curlers who's always complaining about how you're cold? Well, guess what? They've got super comfy and warm pants. They've got great shoes, shirts, helmets, broom bags, whatever you need. And if you were looking for that best delivery aid on the planet, that's Reed Carruthers Pro Slide, which you can get exclusively from Hardline Curling. It's guaranteed for life. Your one-stop shop for all your curling needs. So visit Hardline at www.hardlinecurling.com or go to any one of the 120 Hardline retailers around the world and get your products today. Okay, so let's talk 2009 because you guys were the first team ever. You lost the Olympic Trials final and the Brier final in the same year. How do you come back from that?
Oh, what a disaster. Yeah. I mean, Kevin Cooey, he hadn't made a draw to the 4-foot, let alone the button, in 10 years. And then he does it in the extra end of the Brier. Come on. I still can't believe he made it. I mean, he's a great player now, but he wasn't back then. Give me a break. Jesus. But yeah, no, that was a tough one. I mean, losing that Olympic trial final, it took about 2 months to get over. And my poor wife, she had the brunt of it because I was a miserable wreck. And it wasn't until actually the Olympics started when I kind of started getting over it. But that was a tough pill to swallow because I thought we were going to go. And that's, a big one for me is the Olympics. Right. I've grown up watching it just like most people in this world. And I just, I couldn't believe, I thought that was kind of our time. And then going out and saying again, 2009, number 1 and 2, we're like, hey, well, at least we have the Brier and Martin's not there. So we're going to win. So let's just go to the Brier and win that. And then, our season is, salvaged. Right. Yeah. And then we go and lose that one. And just what a disappointment. And the worst part is you go to these tournaments and the slams afterwards and then they do the announcements of the teams. And of course they go to Kevin Martin and the Olympic gold medalists. And then they go to Kevin's team and the Brier champion. You put your head down and God damn, just the announcement, you can't get over. And I just couldn't wait for the end of the season to come. And I just needed the season to end and get away from curling.
Well, and like you said, I know you're a very involved guy in the curling community in general, but especially in Ottawa. And that must have been a hard part too, because I've heard from curlers before that when you lose those big games, everybody wants to give you their condolences, they're so close. So you're constantly reliving it, right? Like that must be a tough part of it.
Well, I still remember. So 2006, when we make it to our first Brier with Team Howard, we go and we play Jean-Michel Menard in the final. And Jean-Michel Menard is from the Ottawa Curling Club. So we play him. They beat us. And devastating loss again.
Yes.
Right? And then so sure enough, how it goes is I'm playing Jean-Michel Menard on Wednesday after the Brier at the Ottawa League. Like how ridiculous is that? That's got to be a first time ever in Brier history too. So I him and hot and I said, I was so mad. I'm like, I don't want to go. I don't want to show up to the league and everyone's, saying hi to JM and congratulating him. And I got to show up to this. And I didn't want to play anyways because I've been gone for 10 days. So I'm like, what, suck it up, Savill, and just go. So I show up, and literally I'm in one corner of the curling club, and he's on the other one. And I could just see streams of people going from me to him, back to me, and going back and forth. And they'd come up to me like, oh, I'm so sorry. And, tough game. You played great, blah, blah, blah. And then they'd go over, big smile. Hey, congratulations, JM. You did great. That's awesome. And I'm like, what is going on?
Man.
Yeah. So then I'm thinking, okay, at least I'll beat him on Wednesday in the league. And he trashes us, of course. Just drilled me again, just to dig it into me a little bit deeper.
Did you guys talk about it at all? Like when you're out on the ice or whatever? That must be such a weird moment.
Yeah. I joked and I said, at least let me have this one, JM. Okay. And no, he wouldn't let me have it, beat me. And we had a drink afterwards and sat down. It was all good.
Man, that's more courage than I would show. I think I would have stayed home. I would have been like, you know what?
I certainly thought of it. I said, I'll just go. Who cares? This is going to hurt, but it's like ripping off a Band-Aid, I guess.
So did you guys ever have, like, as a team, was there ever, like you said, you had sports psychologists involved and stuff like that. Was there ever a time where you did sit down and you had to talk about, okay, how do we move past this? Or did it feel like, we had the summer, we're fine?
Yeah, I think we kind of just, most of the time we just sort of worked it out together separately, if that's even a term. But sure. Yeah, like we'd get together in groups of 2 and 3 and sort of talk about some things and try to work past it. And, Rich was, he was certainly the go-between. And, the 3 of us would kind of air and, we would talk about things that, we didn't like about the team or whatever, or things that were going bad. And then Rich is like, okay, let me go talk to Glenn. Not like we were leaving Glenn out, but it just so happened that would be the way it would go. We'd kind of work it out, almost a plan. And then Rich would go and talk to Glenn. And, if we're having disagreements, we had some, but, Brent and I were talking too much for a while and changing too many calls. And so the 3 of us would talk, and then Rich would go talk to Glenn and he would work it out with him. And, then they'd sort of be worked out for a couple tournaments at least, right? We get through. But we had to have one, I know, major talk and sit down, and we had to air some things out. And we did, and we got past it, and it worked out from there. But not too many times had we had to get down as four of us and say, okay, we got to straighten some things out.
So let's move on from that. Pardon me. You guys won Ontario 8 years in a row. I mean, that's great. No one's ever going to do that again. Mm-hmm. And it is just absurd that you would win it 8 times in a row. What was the key to your success at the Ontario Provincials? Like, it just kind of seemed like, oh, well, Howard's going to
Glenn.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's good. Like, he is really good.
I mean, obviously you guys were a great team, but you would still figure like somewhere down the line, you'd lose a final.
Yeah. And you know what? After the 4th and 5th, Brent and I would talk about that and say, well, our luck's going to run out one of these times. Like, our last one's going to pick or something, right? Or our team gets really hot. But yeah, like, our success was like, Glenn is really good. When the ice is good, he is unbelievable and still is to this day. And something at the Provincials brings out the best of him. And you've seen that even the last couple of years where Glenn's, won it on his own.
Yeah.
And I think he's just so good. And we had some ridiculous runs where one provincial, the 2007, when Brent had to leave because he was having a baby, the whole week. So that year, they alternated hammers. So every second game, you'd have the hammer to start. Oh,
okay,
this is old.
That's absurd.
Oh, this is old school. So you get a certain rocks and you get hammer or not hammer. Ridiculous system.
Insane.
Oh, yeah. And how long did we have to try to get this changed, right? It took years. So you would, like, when we got the schedule out for provincials, you would look down and say, who do we have the hammer against? And like back then, it would be, you're hoping you have the hammer against Wayne. There's a couple teams that you want hammer against and you might not have it. So you'd look and be like, oh, we don't have hammer against Wayne. Oh, disadvantage already. And it was
oh my God, that's sick.
I don't know how they decided this, the OCA of like who got the hammers. I don't know if they flipped a coin or just said, we're going to try to screw Howard this year.
Right.
Or try to get him to win again, whatever it was. But that year, we were losing for a total of 15 minutes the entire week. And the only 15 minutes was in the final. We got 1, Wayne got 2, and then we got 1 and then stole. And that was the only time we were down, was in the final. All the other times when we didn't have a hammer, we either stole, we took 2 in the first end. And I think we averaged about 7 ends or 8 ends that year too. Like, that's, it was unreal. Crazy. But yeah, like when it comes down to it, Glenn was just really good, and Rich just made everything as well. Like, he was such a good touch player.
What do you think it was about the provincials that brought out the best in Glenn?
I think maybe it was a comfort zone. I think him growing up, everything was the Brier and provincials for him. He's played in 1 million of them. He's got such a great slide, which what is he, 75 right now?
Yeah, so old.
And he's got such a great slide still. Like, it's crazy, right? And like, everyone else's slide will break down or their bodies break down, and his doesn't. And like, that's why he was so good and so consistent. And we'd get there and, he'd bail us out of trouble if we ever got into any. And that's the way we could play aggressive. And our style was, we're going to go after you right away and we're going to make more shots than you. And you better stick with us, because if you can't, we're going to blow you out. And if you can, good for you, but we're probably going to still win in the end because Glenn's going to make some ridiculous shot.
That's a nice feeling. It's a nice feeling when you get that hot skip and you just sit back and you go, okay, well, I'm just going to try not to screw this up.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so you actually brought this up, which is perfect. This is just kind of a little, just a fun question, because I was always curious about this. So you talked about how Bren had to leave to have a baby in 2007. And then you guys did this very funny / interesting feature for Sportsnet Connected, where you pretended that you were all really mad at Brent and that he was off the team. And then you guys also had that documentary that you did. You kind of seemed like one of those teams that was always kind of trying to do some of that more fun stuff. What was the impetus for that?
For which one?
Everything. Like, I just would say, like, your team in general seemed to be the one that if someone was going to do something like that, it was going to be your team. So I don't need you to necessarily speak specifically about either one, but just like kind of what was the reasoning behind that? Why were you the guys that wanted to do stuff like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think lots of time on our hands, that's for sure, right? Just sitting in hotel rooms thinking of things. But, we thought of trying to do something outside the box. And I mean, we had so many good times on the road, we thought, maybe we should have someone following us around, because we have so many laughs and so many things seem to happen with our team. That's just ridiculous. We thought, well, maybe if we actually recorded some of this, and Brent had a guy that he knew, this guy Buck that did this for, well, part-time, and he was willing to follow us around on tour. And we thought, well, why don't we give this a go? And no one's ever done this before.
Yeah.
And let's give it a try and see, because I think we can probably get something pretty funny out of this. And we also had lots of other ideas that sort of didn't work out. But yeah, we thought, why don't we give people behind the scenes of Team Howard? And we thought it'd be really successful.
And what was the feedback like for you guys? Like, did you feel like you were successful in doing that?
Yeah, I think so. We started thinking, we're going to get a television show, and we're going to be, next Housewives of Beverly Hills or whatever those shows are, and we're going to have reality shows. And we just actually didn't really know what to think. We were going to put this thing together, and we knew we had a whole bunch of funny things that were happening, and to us, we didn't know what the final product was going to be like. And it all sort of depended on how our year went too, right? Like if we bomb out or we do really well, that's all part of it. And you just don't know until all of it happens, right? So you have all this videotape of everything going on, and then it's how you play it out. So I think it was pretty good. We probably could have sold a few more of these CDs, but we kind of, for a while, of course, you're like, we're going to do this. We're going to get so rich from this thing. We're going to be selling this thing. We're going to be on tour. People are going to be getting us to go do presentations. Anyways, never happened. Didn't become rich, but we sold a few, so it was good.
So let's move ahead towards the end of that team. How did that breakup come about? Because obviously, like you said, crazy longevity that you guys had.
Yeah.
Just tell me about the story. What was the impetus for it?
We were starting, like the sort of cycle of our team was starting to wane for sure. And, it was sort of talked about, not really talked about every year, which is a strange thing for me because, playing with Howard all the way through, I never thought of long term. It was almost every year, okay, what's happening this year? Never thinking, okay, we're sticking together for 4 or 8 years and stuff, and, let's really build on this. It was kind of like, okay, we're still together, so this is great. Yeah.
Glenn called me again this summer. That's good.
I showed up as Shorty, and I had a uniform, so this is perfect. But yeah, Glenn was getting to the end of, we thought getting into the end of his career, but it looks like there is no end to his career.
No, never.
I never thought that, Brent would switch and play with another team. And that was a complete shock out of left field. I knew something was happening out west. Some teams, there's going to be a shuffle. And then he told us right in the middle of a spiel. I mean, there's no good time to say it, but it was not at the end of the year, which you can't really do because you need to form a team because all teams are formed, which is kind of ridiculous for curling. So the second half of the year or near the end of the year, there's a bunch of guys playing with each other that might not like each other because they've just broken up or it's a ridiculous thing. And, you've got guys playing with someone else, but they have to stick with their team for 2 more tournaments.
Yeah.
So anyways, he told us, which, there's never a good time. And he told us over a lunch and said, guys, I don't want to do this, but I'm playing with another team next year. And we were like, what? Shock. Right. And so, the year's wiped out kind of thing. And like, we have 2 more tournaments to play with them. And, you understand, but I took it really hard. Obviously I've been playing with them forever. And, and then so the band's breaking up, you know what I mean? Like you kind of think this is going to last forever. And at that time I was thinking, I'm going to play with Glenn until his career is done. I mean, he basically made my career. And I'm very loyal. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to stick it out. If he's in a wheelchair playing, I'll be right with him in a wheelchair playing stick curling with him. And that's sort of was my mentality. And, Brent leaving sort of, I guess, maybe changed a few things from there. But yeah, sort of devastating. Yeah.
And so so you played with Brent for obviously such a long time. And I asked the same question to Mark as well, playing with Ben for so long. How do you do that? How do you keep it fresh and how do you play with someone for so long and have it be such an effective partnership?
Yeah, that's the really tough part. And you know what? when you play with someone for so long, it's never an easy breakup. It's never a smooth one, right? I don't think, unless you guys just retire together and you go into the sunset and that's it. But teams have to break up. They have to move. There's a shelf life for every single team.
Yeah.
And you see it with the McEwen team, the 4 good buddies, but they had a shelf life. I mean, they did really well, but they needed to go to that next level. And to do that, they probably had to break up, unfortunately, right? And this, probably the same thing with our team, but to keep it fresh new goals and stuff. And, you have to bring in maybe people from the outside to get a different perspective and to sort of give some rejuvenation to the team as well. And it's hard to get pumped up every single time when you've been playing with the same guys for 8 years and you kind of know, and you just get into this little routine, right? That gets the exact same thing. So you have to switch it up by bringing some other people in.
Okay. So, let's move ahead. So the team breaks up, you're still playing with Glenn, and then you get diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. I don't know that I ever heard the story. Like, when did you find out? How did all of that happen? Because that was obviously a crazy year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I was playing with Sean Adams out in Nova Scotia, right? So I was playing with them. In August, I felt this swelling in my armpit. I thought it was a tight t-shirt and that's it, right? I didn't really notice.
Guns getting too big.
Yeah, well, I'm like, I'd be going to the gym. This is a good thing.
Absolutely.
This shirt's a little small. So the next day I put another shirt on that's nice and loose, still feel his tightness. So I feel underneath there's this big mass down there. Don't think of anything. I go to the walk-in clinic. They just say, oh, your body's fighting something because your lymph nodes are there, right? So usually you're just sick. So he gives me some medication to reduce it. Says go check up on with your GP after next week. And I don't usually go to the doctor because I've never really get sick, but I actually did this time. So he checks me over, and I had some lumps in my neck area, and so that can be cancer. So that is a bit of a red flag. So then it took a couple months to actually diagnose it, and I went through a whole bunch of tests. And I mean, God love Canada and our free healthcare, but it's slow at the GP level.
Yeah.
And it's
time.
Really hard. I mean, we have excellent specialists once you get up to them.
Yeah. But it takes the time.
It takes a while, right? So anyways, and you have to be your own advocate. I've learned that you have to ask and demand things. And if you demand it, they'll just send you up. Right. So I got some blood tests, and I did a whole bunch of things, and finally I was with a specialist, and he said, well, we can everything's coming out negative. So we can either just let it sit for a couple more months, see if it goes down, which it could, or you can get a CT scan. I said, well, I'm not sitting for 2 more months.
Yeah, no kidding.
Right? Let's get a CT scan. So I got the CT scan, and I went back, and I still remember because my wife, I said, this is nothing. So my wife's not really coming to any of these appointments with me. I said, there's no point you taking a day off of work to come to this appointment to hear nothing. So I go back to see the specialist for the results. And so I'm the first appointment of the day. So he's booting up the computer, and he's doing small talk, which is horrible.
Right, of course.
It's such
Especially
a disaster.
when it's like a technology-induced small talk, where you're just like, you're sitting there, like he can see what's going on. You can't even see the screen. You're like, oh my God, come on, let's go.
Yeah, like her. So like, I remember we made small talk about shoes and stuff. Like he's like, oh, I like your shoes. I'm like, yeah, I like yours. And then... So that was actually the only time I was worried going into that, was because I also got an HIV test at the same time, because they wanted to rule that out because that could be it. So I was just sitting there thinking, if I have HIV, this has completely changed my life.
Yeah.
Like absolutely. So that was the first time I had some anxiety going into this. And so anyways, he's booting up his computer. We're talking about our shoes. And then he's like, looks at a piece of paper. He's like, oh yeah, by the way, you're HIV negative. I'm like, oh. Thank God. So it was just a full weight just lifted off me, and I just felt like a light as a feather, and I felt so great. So then he goes, huh. And he's looking at his computer, and the results are up. And I'm like, uh-oh. And he says, yeah, you have Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a type of cancer. And it was like someone just punched me in the face. It was like I just got the best news of my life, and then just got the worst. And of course I'm stunned, and I have no idea what to say, which is always why when you go with someone to get diagnosed with anything, you always bring someone else because the person gets diagnosed, you can't talk. Yeah. And I had no questions. Everything went blank. Thought about my wife, my family. That's all I could think of.
Yeah.
Think of nothing else. And so he gives the famous line of Mary Lemieux had it, played back in the NHL, was the most famous guy who's had it. And then he's like, very straightforward. He's like, I'm going to pass you on to the oncologist. He's going to get in touch with you in a few weeks, and he's going to say the next steps. And that was it. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I walked out, and that was it. And remember, I went to my wife's work, picked her up, and then went to my family's house and had a good cry with everybody. And then that was when I remember sitting down. We went to a coffee shop with my wife before I went to my parents. And my immediate thought was, okay, I got to teach you how to do the online banking. I got to get you all our affairs in order, because I always think that's it.
Right.
And so that was my darkest moment, I think. And then after that, I said, I got to be positive all the way through. And then it was all positive after that. And I didn't really have too many dark moments, because I said, no, I'm getting through this. And that was it.
And you did.
And I did, yeah. And I did, yeah. So now it's a good story.
Yeah, that is a great story.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about, so all this happens, and then there's a great moment, obviously, the 2016 Brier.
Yeah.
How did that come about? How did that even get put together?
Yeah, so there's a lot of people, I think, behind the scenes that got that together for me. And, I'm so lucky to have the curling community behind my back and some great friends. And so it was, behind the scenes, I was part of Nova Scotia. So I had signed up for the playdowns in Nova Scotia. Even though I'd quit curling, I kind of told my team what was going on from sort of September on. I just said I was having some tests, guys, getting done. Didn't think it was anything serious. And then December, I told them what was going on. So I had signed up in Nova Scotia to play in the playdowns. And then when I was diagnosed, and then, this happened, so I'm obviously not curling. So then there was, Rich Hart and John Morris and Brent, they were all got together and said, we want you to play with one of our teams, someone on the ice with us. So they were trying to get me with the Ontario side, but because I was signed up with Nova Scotia, I couldn't play technically with Ontario and be their fifth. So many rules against the associations, right. Horrific situations. So they're fighting. I tried to stay out of it. Apparently there's a big battle. Bottom line, never worked out.
Right. So that was for the whole tournament.
I was going to be the fifth for the tournament.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
So, and I didn't want to be fifth, but it was just like, hey, just so I can be on the ice, or I could be on the players bench and stuff and be there. And I'm going through treatments this time anyways. And I was exhausted, and this was right in the middle of my treatment. So I wasn't going to play. I wasn't probably even going to be on the bench, but it was could be more of a symbolic thing. Right. So the associations basically didn't let it happen for whatever reason. Who knows whose actual fault it is, but we're not here to blame fault, but someone's fault. Sure. Yeah.
You know who you are. If you're listening, it's your fault.
Yeah. But the Curl Canada, they reached out and said, listen, we're basically going to give you a pass. Do what you want. So, you know what? If you want to go down in the dressing room with the guys, if you want to go on the ice, just do it. You're good in our books, right? So I was very grateful for that. And so I remember that week sleeping a lot during the day to try to get some energy up, because normally at night I'm in bed really early. I'm napping all day and then I'm in bed pretty early. And so the night game was, 7:30 at night, and I'm typically in bed maybe by 8:30.
Right.
So rested all day, and we went out, and so they had me come out with Team Canada, and which was really amazing. And just to be able to do that and come out, and they said, you know what, sit on the bench and do whatever you want back down there. So it was Team Canada was playing Ontario. It was a perfect time. It was a Thursday night, I think it was. And so the place was packed. And the ovation was outstanding, brings tears to my eyes still thinking about it. And And then being on the bench and, joking around, and, Rich was back there, and, Glenn and all the guys I played with, and John Mead was coaching as well. And so I sat back there and watched some of the game. And I remember I was sitting beside John, and I thought about this. And I said, you know what? I do not want to curl. I haven't curled for, 5 months. I have zero energy, and, half the time I'm kind of shaky and stuff. So there's no way I want to be on the ice. And I was sitting talking to John, joking around with him, and I see Rich come over, and he says, Savill, you're on. And I'm like, I was just supposed to say no. And I looked over, and TSN had a camera in my face. And I said, well, how do I say no now? Like, it's on live TV. Yeah. So I said, okay. So I walked over there, and I don't get very nervous when I curl, and I was shaking. And especially when I realized all the other games had stopped.
Yeah. And
the crowd's all standing. So I'm tearing up now, of course, right?
Yeah.
And I remember being the hack and just saying, don't fall. But it's amazing what muscle memory will do, because I said, don't fall. And I did my sort of pre-shot routine, which was so natural to me. And I wasn't even thinking about it. And I kind of just did it. And then I slid out, and I remember halfway, I'm like, oh, I didn't fall. Now
I still remember how to do this.
Just get it over the hog line. I let it go. And so anyways, I threw 2 rocks, and yeah, what a really cool moment it was. And they said, do you want to sweep? So I said, no chance. And I got off the ice. But yeah, it was pretty cool.
Well, it was funny listening back to it, because the announcers are like, oh, Craig Savill's going to stay out for the rest of the end or whatever. And I remember watching it live. I'm like, He's going to sweep? Like, why would he sweep?
Oh, yeah.
And then it's like, oh, no, he's not sweeping.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty. I've got a great memory of that, and look around the crowd, and then looking up to the Jumbotron and seeing my wife just melting. Away, and the ugly cry and stuff, and I still make fun of her for it. And God love her. She was beside Judy Howard too, and they had a good hug and stuff. So it was a good moment for both of us.
Yeah, because I watched it back doing research for this, and I'm amazed that you were able to keep it together in the moment, because Nolan is crying, and Pat even says to Glenn on mic, like, I don't know how he's holding it together because I'm gone, and so it just seemed like such a moment. Like, in that moment, how did you keep it together?
You know what? I think it was because I get into the hack, and I've done it so many times, and I was just focused on not falling, to tell you the truth. And yeah, I was fighting back tears and being so appreciative of being there, and looking at the crowd and seeing people wipe their eyes too, and cheering. I was just trying to soak it in, just trying to be in the moment more than anything else, and realizing how lucky I was.
Yeah. So what for you moving forward now, what's the drive for you to come back? Because you have won basically everything. I mean, you talked about the Olympics, but after all that, you go through all this, your health is good, everything's good. Why come back to curling?
Good question. I talked to my wife about it, and she put it pretty simply. She said, I don't want you to stop curling. I want you to stop curling on your own terms, not because of something else. And it felt like if I didn't come back to curling, it was because, cancer gave me that bump in the road that made me stop. And being away from the game, I realized I love it still. I'm still pretty good. Yeah. And I wanted to be back. And I said, you know what? I'm only going to come back if I'm one of the top teams. I don't want to grind it out with teams trying to get into the slams. I want to be a 1 or 2 team in the world, and that's it. And if I can find guys that I like, that I can have fun with, and that can be in top of the world, then I'll play. And of course, things have changed, with my wife and kids as well. And it's busy, and I'm missing a ton, and it's just harder to get away. And my wife said, yeah, I want you to curl too. So I said, okay, well, let's have another run at the Olympics and give it a shot.
And so that's really what it comes down to, is the Olympics.
I mean, yeah, for me, I've won everything.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Yeah, and it does. I mean, it's not the end all. I've realized the Olympics is really hard to get to. It's
big time,
obviously, right? Yeah. And just getting to the Olympics would be amazing. But, I've realized that, it might not happen. So if in 4 years, I don't get to the Olympics, I won't think it's a waste of 4 years of being in this. I've just being with Team Epping for the last couple months, I've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I'm happy that I've come back. And, getting to play back in a Brier, I was lucky enough to be successful early in my career. And I think I've taken a lot for granted that, people just get to the World Juniors and get to all these slams, and you get to win a bunch of slams. You go to the Brier, that's an easy tournament,
cares?
right? Just another tournament. And, after going through what I did, I've appreciated a lot more of the slams and winning the slams. I always knew they were tough, but it was, we got to so many semis and finals. It was just kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
So I have more of appreciation for how hard it is and for how lucky I am. And so this time around, I think I'm more appreciative of just everything.
And how did it come together with Epping? Because, like you said, you're off the radar a little bit. How did that team kind of form? Yeah,
that was tough because not being on tour and not being able to talk to guys, I knew there was lots of backdoor conversations going on, right? Like everybody's talking behind everybody's back and looking out for number one and forming teams. So it was really tough for me to be on the phone and texting people and phoning. So I've actually had a chart at home. And I had a bunch of players' names on there, and the players that I wanted to play with and players that had opportunities. And, after looking at it and saying, okay, here are the players that I would play with and teams, it's a short list of who I wanted to play with. And then you start realizing, okay, well, these guys aren't making a move. They're not maybe looking for a lead. It, became narrow. And John was at the top of the list the whole time. And I chatted with him early in the year and said, hey, I want to play with you. And, and he was looking to restructure his team as well. And we started looking for players.
And how did it come back together with Brent? Was that, had you guys stayed in touch? Like, obviously you were pretty, hurt but by the breakup. How did that come? Like, have you guys been in touch, and how did it come back together?
Yeah, no, sure. That was 4 years ago, right?
Yeah,
so I got over it. Yeah, a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
No, we
yesterday.
Yeah. No, we still talk a lot, and I still go up to his cottage, and so he was actually. I had a couple spies out there that were telling me the rumors that they had heard and who's playing with who, and so that was nice. And he was one of my guys that I could call up and say, "What have you heard so far?" And he'd say, "This is happening." So yeah, certainly keeping in touch with him, and I thought they'd be staying together. And then once Mark was gone, once I heard he was retiring, I heard, maybe there's not a spot for Brent over there and they might be looking for a change. And so when that was the case, I was still talking to Brent. I said, well, is there any chance you'd play? And he said, yeah, absolutely. So that's sort of how it happened. He was actually not on kind of the radar when I was talking to John and trying to figure things out. I thought Brent maybe an outside chance, probably not. Yeah. And then, after that sort of move happened, then became a reality, and then team formed pretty quick.
And has it fit back together nicely, or has there been a bit of a reacclimation period?
No, it's been, we're back to our old ways, arguing and stuff and fighting like little schoolgirls. Yeah, no, it's actually been pretty easy. And it's kind of funny because I think about this of when I formed with Howard team. We're getting sort of 2 and 2 together again, right? Because John and Matt played together for 4 years. So it's a little bit easier forming this team again too.
And so looking ahead, what do you look forward to most for the next 4 years with playing with John?
I look forward to working hard and getting better with these guys because all 4 guys want to be better. And, maybe that's one thing that we maybe didn't do with Howard of okay, how do we every weekend, how do we get better? And how do we get rid of our little flaws, right? And how do we move that bell just a little bit, or that bar? But this team is doing that. And, with how competitive is out there and grinding it out every game, and the international teams are so good now. And it used to be back in the day, you get an international team in your side and you're like, oh, there's a game off because they're going to be awful. Yeah. And now they're good. Yeah. And now they can beat you. So this team wants to get better. So I'm really looking forward to us finding our way as a team and then working with some people to get better.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Craig. I mean, this has been amazing. To end off, I always give everyone a chance if you want to thank your sponsors and give a shout out to your team, social media, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I just like to thank. We've got some great sponsors helping us out, and obviously, if without them, we can't do this, right? So, been there, dump that. Who has been sponsoring us for a while, sponsoring me for a while. Great sponsors, great guys. Great name, yes. VR Mechanical, John and Vic. There, John is one of my biggest supporters, and he's run this this trip with the boys down south every year that he's invited us to a few times, and what a blast it is. So hopefully he invites us again. I'm not sure he's going to listen to this, but I might have to send him
John,
the tape.
if you're listening to this, I am also available. So if you need a VR Mechanical podcaster, hey, just send me an invite.
There you go. Yeah. So he's been great. He's sent me a lot of messages when I was sick too, and really stand up guy. OSMB, Sue Sells, which is an amazing sponsor for curling. Mm-hmm. What a great human being. So he's helping us out again this year, which is great, and also Dynasty, of course, too, and Balance Plus.
Excellent. And on Twitter, you guys are what, Team Epping?
Team John Epping.
Epping.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're at Craig Savill.
I'm at Craig Savill. Yeah. I'm just a little boring. I'll sometimes throw in the chirps here and there. But yeah, our team social media is very active. We've got lots of good stuff there, lots of inside stuff. And if you need anything with Team John Epping, you go there and you'll get the info.
Beautiful. Thanks for talking, Craig. This has been awesome.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, there you have it. Another phenomenal episode of the show. As I said off the top, just felt like we really ran the gamut of emotions in that one, and it was a true pleasure to sit down with Craig, get to know him a little bit better, and really get to enjoy his company for the hour and a little bit that we got to chat there. So once again, this episode presented by CurlingZone, Dynasty Curling, and Hardline Curling. I couldn't do it without them. Thanks to everybody who's been listening. Season 2 has really got off to a really great start with our episodes with Nicholas Sedin and Jamie Sinclair. If you haven't listened to those, check them out. Go back and listen to Season 1 if you're just getting on board with the podcast now. If you like the podcast, tell your friends. That's really the biggest thing I can say. It's very important to us to have this podcast spread word of mouth and really get the word out there about it. A lot of people work hard on this show, including my producer, Daniel Cuzzetto, the theme songs by Graham Wright, the artwork by Kody Audette. You can follow us at Stone Straw Pod on Twitter. Next week, I sit down with Krista McCarville. I wanted to sit down with Krista because, first of all, I feel like people don't know her super well for someone that's been playing at the top level of the game for a really long time. But I also wanted to get her perspective because she's one of those few competitive curlers who, I've had multiple people say to me, if Krista McCarville played more, she could be one of the best players in the world, and she doesn't want to play more. She's happy with playing the amount that she's playing, and so I was really curious to ask her about that and how it is, sort of living that full tier 2 life, where you kind of know going into the season you're only going to play 4 or 5 events, and she still works full-time as a teacher. And so we talk a lot about balancing a full-time job with being one of the top curlers in the women's game. It's a fascinating chat. So once again, tell your friends, rate and review the show on iTunes, and we'll see you back here next week for Stone and Straw with Krista McCarville. Thanks for tuning in.